In section 4.1, you'll be introduced to one of the key aspects of any statistical study, which is the data collection portion. Now, there are four main components of the statistical problem-solving process, and the first of which is to ask questions. We want to make sure we're asking a question about something that varies. That makes it a statistical problem. After that, we're going to collect the data on whatever our topic is. We'll analyze that data, and then we'll interpret the results. As an example of this four-step process, let's say Tommy and Hannah go off campus to eat lunch every day. They have a short lunch period and they wonder if it would be faster to order inside or to use the drive-thru. That's the statistical question that they're trying to answer, as the order times will vary based on both of those different options there. Each day they flip a coin to determine which method, inside or drive-through, to use, and they record their response variable, which is the total length of time it takes to get their food. This is the data collection portion of the process. They analyze the results and determine that ordering inside took about 2 minutes and 34 seconds less. Again, we are analyzing our data here, and then we interpret our results, their conclusion, it's faster to go inside. In this section, we're focusing on the data collection portion of the process, which starts with identifying a valid statistical question, which is based on data that vary. In Tommy and Hannah's example, the question they asked was valid because the time it takes to receive their order varies each time they get lunch. Let's look at a few examples and identify if they are valid statistical questions. How long can students at your school hold their breath on average? This would be valid because the length of time that different students can hold their breath will vary. How much money does Mr. Sager have in his wallet right now? Not valid because the amount of money in my wallet right now doesn't change. And C, what proportion of US adults engage in vigorous exercise at least once a week? This is valid as well, not necessarily because the proportion is changing, but because we won't be speaking to everybody in the US population. We'll be taking a sample, and that proportion will vary with each sample depending on who we speak to. With that in mind, let's say we want to find out what % of young drivers in the US text while driving. It wouldn't be feasible to go out and speak to all young drivers, although we'd like to. All right, that would be called a census if we could somehow manage to talk to every young driver in the United States. It would take too much time, it would cost too much money. Instead, we're going to take a sample, which is just selecting a few people from the population to represent everyone. Some important terminology for moving forward in this chapter. When we talk about a population, we're talking about the entire group of individuals that we want information about. If we somehow were able to go out and speak to everyone, that would be a census. Now, for something like the US population, that wouldn't be feasible, but we could, in some cases, take the census of students in a school, or more simply, students in a class. A sample is a subset of individuals from the population, which hopefully, if it's done correctly, will represent all of the people in the population accurately. So in these two problems, what's the population and what's the sample? In part A, it says the student government at a high school surveys 100 students at the school to get their opinions about a change to the bell schedule. The sample is going to be the 100 students that they chose to speak to. And the population is going to be all the students at the school. Hopefully, the 100 students that they speak to are representative of the entire population. In part B, the quality control manager at a bottling company selects 10 cans from the production line every hour to see if the volume of soda is within the acceptable limits. This is the sample here, the 10 cans that he selects, and that's representing the population of all cans filled that hour, because this is happening every hour. Later in the chapter, we're going to get into a lot more detail about each of these types of studies, but just as an introduction, there's two types of studies. One is observational, the other one is experiment. An observational study does what it sounds like. We're just observing individuals. We're seeing how they respond without attempting to influence them. Right? We're not changing their behavior in any way in an observational study. An experiment does the opposite. where we're deliberately imposing treatments. We're giving some people one treatment, other people another treatment, and seeing how they react to those treatments. Each of these types of studies has different objectives and different limitations. If we're doing an observational study, we're primarily looking to find some kind of relationship between the variables or to compare groups. All right, are the variables X and Y related? We can put them in a scatter plot. We can make segmented bar charts, etc. If we're doing an experiment, we're looking for a more specific conclusion. We want to say that X causes Y, and that kind of cause and effect conclusion can only be achieved through a randomized experiment. When it comes to identifying if a study is an observational study or an experimental study, the key thing it comes down to is whether or not treatments were imposed on the subjects. So in Part A, we have 90 residents of a retirement community selected at random. Each member was asked a number of questions, including questions about exercise and blood pressure. Their conclusion was that residents who exercise more often were less likely to have high blood pressure. Now note that they are being asked these questions, but they're not being told to do anything. They're not being told to exercise. So there are no treatments here. And because of that, this is an observational study where we're just observing their normal routine. In Part B, students in a statistics class were divided into two groups at random. Students in one group were given a set of words to memorize in a room with music playing. The other group had the same list of words to memorize, but in a quiet room. Students in the quiet room were able to remember more words on average. So in this experiment, there is a treatment. Okay? Is there music playing or not? Quiet room, wherever it said that. They were split into these groups at random. So certain students had the treatment of music playing, while the other ones were a control group where no music was playing. This is an experiment because treatments are imposed on the students.